Hi, this is Aaron with Vanishing Cabinets, and in this video I will be continuing my quest of building out my garage workshop, including adding some much needed shelving and cabinetry, as well as finally solving the riddle of what to do with my eyesore of a furnace. So get comfy and enjoy the show. This is the next corner I need to address. Right now I got a bunch of crap over here. I'm using the space for some charging and storage for some old tools that I need to unbox. I think I can make it a lot more useful, build out some shelves, maybe some counter space. Not 100% sure yet. At a very minimum, it'll make it look a lot nicer. As per usual, the start of every project for me begins with staring and thinking. And it's surprising how much time I actually spend on this part, and I don't know if others are like me, but I spend forever trying to plan every detail of a project ahead of time, like completely end to end, when oftentimes the design changes throughout the build. So now I'm starting to think that the best way to go is just to start with one section or one component that I know I want and then go from there. So with that mentality in mind, I knew at a minimum I wanted shelves for all my paints and varnishes, and that's where I got started. There was an open corner that looked to be a good spot, so this is where I got to work building a corner shelving unit out of some 3/4 inch plywood for the main body and 1/4 inch plywood for the backing. Nothing fancy here, definitely going for substance over form, just trying to make something strong enough to hold everything that I need it to hold and minimize the amount of material. This is basically a 4-sided plywood box on one wall and a 3-sided box on the other wall attached to the first box with pocket holes. This will definitely be able to support paint and smaller items, but it will get pretty sketchy if you were to use it as a dumbbell rack. Even with skimping on the material here, this still proved to be quite heavy when moving. And I'm doing this with open-toed sandals just because I like to live dangerously and get my heart going once in a while. The HGTV in me has me considering the color palette of the space, and in keeping with the theme of the other furniture in here, I had no choice but to paint this unit black. The spray paint was an impulse buy at the checkout line at Lowe's, and it covers a lot of surface area extremely fast, but holy crap, the fumes are insane. I was definitely making trips to Mars while working on this. And once I got started, I just couldn't stop. I decided to go nuts here and just paint everything black. I took a look at the various items I wanted to store in here, and there was quite a bit of variability in the heights of the items between the 1-gallon paint buckets, the 5-gallon buckets, and the smaller, shorter cans. I tried to think of a layout that would maximize the space and ultimately landed on this pattern of alternating shelves where the overlapping areas in the corner would create shorter shelves. And speaking of shelves, I'm going with 3/4 inch MDF, which is not my first choice, but I had some extra that had been water damaged and I didn't have a great use for it, so I dressed it up with this black peel and stick wallpaper that I've used throughout the shop to dress up these ugly cheap material surfaces. I mounted these alternating height shelves onto some support blocks screwed into the outer frame on each end of the shelf, and I think the span was just short enough not to have to add more support. MDF does have a tendency to sag over time, so I may have to make new ones eventually, but this will work for now. My hardwood supplier takes the Costco approach to sales and gives a discount for buying in bulk, so I still have a fair bit of this maple sitting around, and I figured why not use it to dress up the shelving unit. Plus, I already had a ton of this maple trim throughout the shop, so I didn't want to break precedent. And after some light sanding, this unit was all done. With the shelving in place, I figured for the sake of variety, I would add a cabinet box with some drawers. For one, I could use the drawers for all manner of finishing items like paintbrushes, rags, and drop cloths. And two, this would also give me some wall space to mount my tool battery chargers, which is what I was using this little corner for before. For the cabinet carcass, I cut out 3 panels of 3/4 inch plywood, 2 for the sides and 1 for the bottom. And for the top and back, I was just going to cut out 3-inch stretchers out of the 3/4 inch plywood, again just to save on material. Ah! Okay. Horrible idea. I don't understand these clamps. Like I can't go back, can only go forward. Why can't I go back? Please just go backwards. Backwards, just go that way, man. I'm down. You piece of shit. Alright. That was rough. I assembled the box with pocket holes and glue, and clamps, when properly utilized, definitely help to keep the boards in place while driving in the screws. Oh no. Please. Oh, thank God. After screwing in the 4 top and back stretchers, I got to work on the face frame, which I made out of maple. I'm definitely not doing anything fancy with this, just brad nails to hold the boards in place and keep them aligned. What the man? Like, what? This right here is why you never have your finger resting near or within the length of the nail from where you're popping in the nail, because it could go wherever. I would know I had it pop right out of this thumbnail right here one time. If this were a kitchen cabinet or something, I'd definitely put more effort to make this more aligned and conceal the joinery better, but for shop cabinets, this guy is lucky to get a face frame at all. It probably goes without saying at this point that black stain was required so I could sleep at night, and then next I got to work on my cut list for all the drawer parts I would need for this cabinet. I decided to go with 3 ultra wide drawers just based on the stuff I wanted to store, and I didn't do any shelving in here just because I already had the shelving unit in the corner. The drawers are made out of 1/2-inch plywood for all the parts, including the bottom panel. When I made some drawers for my miter saw station with 1/4-inch plywood for the bottom panel, I didn't really like how flimsy they felt, so I figured I'd spring for the 1/2-inch throughout since it's only 3 drawers anyway. My main workbench has all 3/4-inch plywood for the drawer parts, which is great, but if you haven't picked up on it by now, 3/4-inch plywood is in short supply in my shop, so I'm doing all I can to avoid using it. I'm by no means a professional cabinet maker, although my channel name may imply that, but I have made a fair bit of cabinets, and I really like these Craig drawer slide mounting jigs since they really help to hold the slides level. As long as your marks are consistent, the slides will be too. Craig, you can just go ahead and mail me that endorsement check whenever you get a chance. If you are wondering where my channel name comes from, it's actually a reference to Harry Potter. The vanishing cabinet comes as a pair, and they basically make a teleportation device where you can go in one and appear in the other. And no, it's not like in The Fly where you become grotesquely disfigured if a fly gets into the machine.
Oh, that's disgusting.
I'll take that. That's pretty good. No, honestly, that's pretty freaking good. Pretty freaking good. Let's check the last one. Okay, 3 for 3. Let's see. Okay. These are good to go. Pretty happy with that. Alright, now let's put it in its home. Oh my God. Oh, that's tight. Oh, shit. This is what I was going for, where that frame covers that little transition right there, so it looks like a clean transition. This side is about as tight as it could possibly get. After quickly tacking in a cover for the toe kick, it was time to get to work on the drawer fronts. Not surprisingly, I made these drawer fronts out of maple, and these are shaker style with maple for the rails and stiles and black 1/4-inch plywood for the panels. I used a 2-piece set of shaker router bits and a router table to create the tongue and groove edge profiles, which align perfectly when it comes to assembly. If you've seen my previous video from my table saw workbench, these should look really familiar, and I really liked how those came out, which is why I decided to do the same here. Yeah. These are pretty freaking perfect. After the glue up, I cleaned up the faces with a chisel, sander, and a planer, which is probably overkill. And then I drilled out some holes for the hardware. And I had some handles left over from my previous project that were pretty short, so I just decided to put 2 handles on these drawers since they were so wide. I used a few spacer shims that were 1/8 of an inch to keep the drawer front in the right spot while I drilled in the screws. And I went with a 1/4-inch reveal here, meaning the drawer fronts are inset in the frame and are sitting back about a 1/4 inch from the front face frame, which I think gives it a nice look. Plus it helps to hide any minor imperfections with alignment. If I tried the nail being completely flush to the face frame, I'm sure I would have missed by some. Small details here, but I figured I'd share in case you were wondering. I hit up all that maple with some gloss spray lacquer just to give the wood a small layer of protection. And lacquer's nice because if you want to do multiple coats, you can basically do them back to back since it dries so fast. Pretty good. No soft close, but whatever. You can never have too much countertop space in a shop, and even though this is a small, isolated corner, I'm positive it will still get cluttered up with all kinds of crap, just like all the other flat surfaces in the garage. I have this horrible habit of just setting stuff down whenever I'm done with it, and then later I can never find anything. I would say that I have plans to change this, but let's be honest, I'm a 37-year-old man, and I don't see this changing anytime soon. And now this cabinet is done, and this is the cleanest it will ever look. I know you were impressed by my box opening ability, which comes after opening thousands of boxes and years working in stockrooms. But don't be distracted, what's important is the contents of the box, and this is a lumber rack that I got off Amazon, which I'm going to be mounting in the space above the shelving and cabinet box I just built. I already have a dedicated wall in the shop storing materials, but the racks are placed about 3.5 feet apart, which is great for storing longer boards, but I still end up having a lot of shorter boards on the ground. But now I have this great space to have a rack for shorter boards and an otherwise useless wall. Alright, Chief, here you go. Oh my god. Jesus. At this point, the wall in the shop was starting to come together pretty nicely. I really liked how much added storage I had, and truly that lumber rack was perfect for the area. But I still had this bulky furnace here, which was really cramping my style. So while I continued to think about what to do with that, I figured I would dress up the door to the house. For those wondering what this mural is, a small hint. Speak friend and enter. Okay, that probably didn't help anybody that didn't already know what this was from, but for you non-nerds out there, this is from Lord of the Rings. Putting up this mural did give me some valuable thinking time to decide what to do with the furnace area, and ultimately I decided to cover it up with plywood. Now instead of just boarding up my furnace and rendering it inaccessible, I thought that I could put the plywood on some swinging door hinges. That way I could access the furnace the couple of times a year I need to get in there to either light the pilot or to turn it off, whatever. And then I would have it covered by the plywood 99% of the time and use it however I wish. Not bad, right? Well, that's what I got to work doing, and since there was a ton of surface area I needed to dress up, I thought it'd be a cool spot to have a comically oversized VC to silence any doubt as to whose shop this was. Well, it looks like a 5th grader did it. This was easier said than done, though, as I came to the not-so-quick realization that I am not so adept at freehand painting, especially a tricky letter like a C. But I thought better of it, and instead of simply painting on a VC, I thought it would look better with some dimension and put some boards in the shape of a VC. The V was easy enough, with just making some angled cuts on my miter saw, but for the C I had to do some shaping with the jigsaw. And I'm not one to brag, but if there were ever the woodworking Olympic Games, I would throw my name in the hat for the jigsaw event. And also probably the screwing event. And I'm talking driving in screws with an impact driver, not what you were thinking. Hey, I've been sitting at this edit booth for about 8 hours straight at this point, so you gotta cut me some slack if the commentary here gets off the rails. Getting back on topic though, I did cut out a VC sign that I felt like was up to snuff, and I painted the edges black just to give it a bit more dimension. I also had a few strips of quarter round that I tacked onto the front sheet of plywood here to make a border, and I ended up putting 2 strips back to back, making more like a half round look. Once the border was on, I could get this massive VC logo put on, and I just ended up using some construction adhesive and pin nails to get the job done. And for good measure, I added a little bit of conditioning oil just to warm this wood up, and the plywood was ready to go. No, you are not seeing double. I actually had to enlist the help of some free labor in the form of my older brother who was in town from Seattle for the holidays. This plywood was pretty bulky and unwieldy, so I figured I could use all the help I could get to mount this thing. First thing I had to do was build a frame from some 2x4s and 2x2s that would be mounted in the space next to the furnace.
But it's like pretty
secure in there with the wall. This frame would primarily serve as the mounting surface for the hinges holding that swinging plywood door. I think it's ready. Oh shit. Nice. Does it go all the way? No. Looks good. Yeah. Yeah. Not bad. With the plywood door hung with only minor adjustments, we then added a second plywood panel just to complete the job of concealing this taupe monstrosity from the 90s, with the additional benefit of more surface mounting area for storage. Cool. And speaking of more surface mounting area, I swiftly added this multi-tool holder thing to hold on my long handle items, and this housing was looking even better than I thought it would. This next part goes back to what I said at the beginning of the video, where I said the design ends up changing throughout the project, and in this case I noticed that once the door was on, there was some additional opportunity to create even more storage. And one such instance was the space just to the left of the furnace above the cabinet box. I made a super simple set of shelves here out of plywood and decided to mount it directly to that big plywood swinging door. That way I could utilize the space behind the door without impeding any of the countertop space. I added some iron-on edge banding onto the shelving unit, which is pretty easy to cover up the plywood edges. Just gotta press an iron onto the banding, which heats up the adhesive already on the banding and allows it to adhere to the surface. I just added a small little latch here to make sure that the door stayed closed when not in use. The inherent problem with painting everything black all the time is that everything becomes really dark. And while I'm definitely one who likes dim mood lighting, the one exception I have is in the shop. I needed to add some lighting, and here I'm using some low voltage under cabinet lighting for the job, which I already had some power running to from the other wall. So it was really just the process of adding a few lights to that circuit. While I didn't get a ton of use out of this space before the project, I did have one main use, and that was storage for my power tool batteries. I just had them sitting on a fold-out patio table plugged into the wall, but I know I still wanted to keep those over here, and since they all have those mounting holes to be mounted to the wall, I figured I'd put them in the backsplash area just above the drawer cabinet. I didn't want to mess with any wall anchors or trying to find a stud, so I just mounted a piece of 1/2-inch plywood right onto the wall, and then I could just drive in screws wherever I needed. Man, it feels so nice to get the cords organized here. Seeing the bird's nest of cords that I had before not only looked bad, but was probably going to burn my house down eventually. For any charging items that didn't have mounting holes, I built this little shelf just to keep as much stuff as I could off the work surface. And with that done, it was time for the home stretch. I think the door looks pretty good on its own, but I want to make some use out of it if I can. The only thing I really need right now that I can think of is storage for saw blades. And I think saw blades look kind of cool on their own anyway. I was going through my scrap pile and I found these old door parts that I had made. And I think I cut them too short or something, so I had to scrap them. But the interesting part of them is they have this little groove here that I think I could rest the saw blade in there. But it's too shallow right now, so I just need to make it a little deeper. I never thought I would find a use for these either, so I'm happy to use these. I'm going to try this hand transition thing. Ah, stupid. This area I really thought a lot about, including potentially adding a pull-out table, basket storage, mounting table saw jigs, but the saw blades really needed a home. And while I can't say this will be permanent, I'm currently really happy with having them here. And in the words of the dude, it really tied the room together. All that was left was to actually fill this newly built storage with the unorganized junk that I had lying around. And at long last, this wall was done. Huge thanks to everybody who ventured this far, and I hope you got some tips or inspiration for your own projects. If you want to support me, please consider subbing and liking the video if you haven't already done so, and I will see you on the next one.